Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Question of the Day with me, Femi, and
Femi.
So, we're going to continue where we left off last time on this series where we're talking about our Christianity, and I think last time we sort of introduced the topic by going into what Christianity represented, and then we kind of went a little bit as far as biblical Christianity versus the world's Christianity. And so today I just want us to kind of continue upon that pattern. So one of the things that we learned, especially like early on in our faith, and even some of us even before we even got into a relationship with Christ, we learned that being a Christian, one of the ways that we identify that is by the way that we emulate Christ, being of Christ. Remember, the term Christian was given to the disciples because of the fact that they were doing the things that Christ did when he was here on earth. So the question of the day basically is, what does it look like to emulate Christ? Because we want to be able to, as believers, be able to understand what it is that Christ actually did and what it is that we're trying to emulate, and separate that from the facts, like basically what's given in the Word of God versus like what we personally believe that Christ did, because I feel like if you ask like the average person, like, who was Christ, what did Christ do, you're going to hear a lot of things, they're not necessarily going to be biblical, and that's one thing that we want to be able to properly discern, so that whenever we do say, yes, I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, and I do live my life in a way where I'm trying to emulate Christ, that we're actually following the patterns of Christ, and what he actually did on earth. So, I mean, whenever you think about emulating Christ, what do you think about?
Well, obviously, I know we're not perfect, so this is not something that we can do 100% because Christ was perfect and we're human. But when I think about emulating Christ, first thing I think about is, through our actions. Because whenever Christ he's still on earth, but, whenever he was here, disciples were walking with him, he would communicate with the Father, God, a lot. So obviously having that open communication with God through prayer, through reading our word, and showing love towards others, because that's what Christ did the most. He showed love towards others. So through our actions, through our speech, through our deeds, showing that we love everybody and not just the people that are closest to us, also people that we don't know. And, spreading the gospel, obviously, because that was one of Christ's main mission. He talked to other people about himself. So it's our job to talk to other people about him and display, our love for Christ to others. So those are some of the things I think about when I hear the word emulating Christ, or the phrase emulating Christ.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. And yeah, like I said, you're gonna hear things like that. I mean, some people, we get that understanding as far as emulating Christ, and others, they might go based on like what they've heard, maybe what they've seen from other people, because I mean, you can think of like somebody who doesn't really have a relationship with Christ, but they know of Christ of being like this good person per se. So it's like, to somebody to emulate Christ is to be good 100% of the time. So, and then it kind of brings in the question, how do you even properly emulate Christ, knowing that, you think of yourself as a human being who is not perfect. So it's like, how can I emulate perfection, in Christ, as far as like being a good person all the time. So things like that, those are the kind of things that I kind of want us to think about right now as, we go into the Zoom meeting and just, discuss this further. But I had two scriptures that we're going to read in regards to that, specifically in Matthew and one in Philippians. So Fumi's going to read Matthew chapter 11, and this is verse 29.
Okay. So Matthew 11:29 says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Okay, so and I think some of you guys pretty much understand what the yoke means, right? Because just to kind of bring it back, it's that farming apparatus, that tool that basically they put on the cattle, like the animal that basically, they were yoked to like another animal. So wherever one went, the lead, I guess, they would both go that direction. So it's like you're yoked to that animal,
like
that other animal. It's not really per se a weight, but it's more like, it's like it has to do with guidance, because you don't want it to be where both animals, or however many animals, are unyoked and basically they're walking separate directions. So if you're trying to go forward, but then animals trying to go this direction, trying to go that direction, then it's going to cause basically damage. You're not going to be able to move forward in that direction. So when it's said here in Matthew, as far as like taking that yoke upon yourself and learning, it's like going the direction that Christ is going, following in his footsteps. Like he takes the lead and you're basically following along with him. You're yoked with him. So whatever Christ experienced, you're wanting to experience that as well. It talks about learning, like he did. So it's like the purpose even behind following Christ is to learn. That's why we even talk about being a disciple. Whenever you think about a disciple, it's not just like a student per se. That person, that individual should also have that same desire to want to emulate Christ, because you want to learn from him, and learning all these things, you want to be able to apply it to your life as well. So, when we talk about emulating Christ, it's almost like that discipleship portion as well, because if you're a believer, if you actually have faith in Jesus Christ, like, you want to learn from him, and then you also should want to do the same things that he did. So it's it'd be weird to claim Christianity, but then it's like you don't really have that desire to want to be like him. So it's like that there's kind of going to be that friction there. So so Matthew 11:29 kind of goes into details as far as like taking that yoke upon ourselves and behaving basically like Christ did, as far as like even being lowly and being humble, and following his direction and being able to find rest for our souls. And so that's one example, and the other one was,
I have a question before we move on. Whenever I hear like my burden is light, kind of sounds like an oxymoron a little. Can you explain that?
It sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah, like my burden.
Okay.
Like when you think of a burden, you don't think of like light, like that being light. You automatically think of something that's like negative.
Yeah. I mean, it, without going like too deep into it, because I'm pretty sure that I could make a whole separate discussion about this, but basically the burden being light is that following Christ, and I'm sure it's said in other places in the Bible, following Christ is not easy. It's not. He never advertised it as like a way of life that was going to be easy. Like there was going to be challenges with it. Like when he literally says things like bearing your own cross, like to us today that seems so. It's almost like a flippant statement, like it's easy, like it's just like it's easy to say, oh, you got to bear your cross, like, but literally even back then, when you think about the cross and the fact that it is so gruesome, and it was just like it's a path that nobody wanted to be on. Like nobody wanted to end up on the cross. So if this person is telling you now, in order to follow in his way and live the type of life that he lived, you have to bear that cross. You have to carry that cross. You have to basically walk in a path that you might end up on that cross. So it was like, it's whoa, that is a burden. That is heavy. That is something that in order to carry that, it's like, man, like it's almost impossible. Like just the thought of having to go through that. But then when he says it's going to be light, it's like, obviously
you're going to have it, but it's going to be more bearable.
it's like it's a tremendous burden, but yes, with him, because you're going through this with him, because being able to rest, to find that rest, and to be able to claim that yoke, that burden is going to be easy, is being able to, it starts with being able to identify like who you're yoked with, you know. So it's like, you know, it's not just anybody, you know. If it was just anybody and somebody was just telling you that, like, yeah, like that's crazy. But you know, Christ, especially being able to identify who he is and knowing that, okay, God, you know, okay, Lord, like you're going this direction, I don't know, like it's not easy, it's tough, like you're still going to go through life circumstances, like the rain falls on, you know, the righteous as much as the ones that are not righteous. So it's like, I'm going through this, but God, I'm with you, like I'm following you, and you have promised in your word, you've said things that, you know, are going to be for me at the end of this journey. So as we continue this journey, so it's like having that, exercising that faith, you know, to that trust that, you know, God, even though this is going crazy right now, this burden is heavy, that we're going to make it to the other side, you know, that whole boat thing. So yeah, that's what that kind of meant. So, you know, emulating Christ, part of emulating Christ, I would say, is it goes along with the fact that Christ was burdened with a lot of things while he was here on earth. Like, you know, he went through it. And it's like, in the same way, like if we're going to emulate Christ, we're not just thinking about emulating just the good things that he did, as far as like preaching the gospel and, you know, doing good, loving others, but emulating him in the fact that even the roads, the tough, like, you know, persecutions and the sort of things that he went through, that we are probably going to take part in that as well. We are going to take part in that as well. It might not be as gruesome as the cross per se because of the times that we live in right now, but there's still going to be hurdles and troubles that we as believers will have to go through because of the fact that we are following Christ. So those are the type of burdens that he's talking about.
So do you think emulating Christ is similar or the same thing as bearing the fruits of the Spirit? And love, joy, peace, long suffering too.
Yeah, because if you want to think about it this way, I mean, the fruits of the Spirit is almost like the attributes of Christ. I can think about it in that way, because these are the things that Christ displayed while he was here on earth. Because if I'm talking about emulating Christ and fruits of the Spirit, like all that love, joy, and everything, Christ, he bared those fruits. Like, and yes, long suffering, because long suffering is one of those fruits because of the fact that there were burdens, and he had to suffer, and he had to. Those sufferings were long, and they were tough, you know. So you could say it's like synonymous. It's just along the same lines as well. So that's the answer to that question. But just quickly read Philippians 1:27.
Okay. Philippians 1:27 states, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel."
Yeah. So, and this is Paul talking right here, and it basically just talks about how, you know, even though he's absent, it wanted to hear that these Philippians, these new believers, they're all standing firm in their faith, and basically they're all united in, you know, in their behavior, as far as like, you know, their faith, like being fully in display in the way that they lived. So, you know, it's not just it's not just like a personal individual decision to emulate Christ. Like, as a body, you know, as a member of the church, we should all be united in that idea that we should emulate Christ, you know. So, you know, it goes against, you know, the worldly, I guess, like from a person who claims to be a Christian based on, you know, like the other thing that we talked about, if you're just like a United States citizen,
like individual standards.
Like, so those kind of people, you know, they might not think that emulating Christ might be something that is mandatory per se, because like I said, you know, if somebody believes that emulating Christ is to be perfect all the time, to perform miracles, or like all these things where they know that they've kind of like had it in their mind that they can't do those things. So it's almost like, okay, well, I'm just gonna do this other stuff instead, and meanwhile, as a part of the body, we are doing something completely different from the rest. So it's like, isolating ourselves, and now it's like, our behaviors and actions are not about Christ at all, So, if we basically take our own personal understanding of what we feel like it is to emulate Christ, and not being united with a group of believers, the body, and doing that in unity, then we're already on the wrong path. It should be something that, as a body of believers, that we should all be doing together in unity. So that's what Paul was saying there. So, I don't want, us to kind of get into that mindset where it's like, okay, well, it's like when you think about that daily, it's something that will really like reinforce your actions, because if you think about something and it's really contrary to how other people believe, especially other people in the body believe, then it's like, okay, something's wrong here. Either I'm off or they're off. Like, we need to figure out what the disconnect is so we can be united and actually walk in the way that God has said that we should in His Word. So, I'll just kind of have a soft landing there for now. So in regards to that, so we will talk about this, in the Zoom meeting, and we'll go into details as far as like what are examples of that is one of the questions we ask, as far as emulating Christ. What aren't the examples of that? Like, what would you think like a typical person who just, like somebody who's just fresh as far as like in the Word, what do you think they would think as far as like the action that they should do in order to emulate Christ? So we'll go into that in detail tonight, and we look forward to talking to y'all, and can't wait to chop it up with y'all. See you guys later.